Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our today's panel discussion on the role of genetically modified crops in food security and better farmer livelihoods in India. Today's panel discussion would be moderated by Prashant Narang, Senior Fellow at CCS. Over to you, Prashant.
Thank you, Ashok. Thank you. So, thank you everyone for joining us today. Today we have three esteemed panelists with us, and I would first start with the introduction. We have Mr. Krish Ashok, and he's the author of Masala Lab. Masala Lab is one of the books that, very few books that I have in my kitchen. This is about the science of Indian cooking, published by Penguin Random House, and it's an Amazon bestseller that explores the science of Indian cooking with the aim of making the reader a better cook and turning the kitchen into a joyful, creative playground for culinary experimentation. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Mr. Ashok is also a regular columnist on food, science, and culture for publications such as Mint, Hindu, Scroll, and BuzzFeed. In his day job, Mr. Ashok is the global head of digital workplace for TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, and helps Fortune 1000 companies reimagine the future of work, a role that is at the intersection of technology, design, and culture. Warm welcome to you, Mr. Ashok.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
We have Mr. Ghanwat with us. As we know, Mr. Ghanwat is the president of Swatantra Bharat Party. He's also the former president of Shetkari Sangathan, which is a Maharashtra-based farmer union founded by the late Sharad Anantrao Joshi. He was also part of the 3-member Supreme Court committee that studied the recently repealed farm laws. He's an activist who has been talking about the importance of agriculture reforms, including allowing GM crops in India. And he has been talking about these reforms since the 1990s. Welcome, Mr. Ghanwat, once again to our panel discussion, to CCS panel discussions. Then we have Dr. K.C. Bansal. He had also joined us recently at Pizza Policy, and all the journalists loved his talk. And so today he is with us for this panel discussion as well. He's the former director of the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, ICAR, which is Indian Council of Agriculture Research, New Delhi. He spearheaded the National Transgenic Crop Network across various ICAR research institutions. He also served as Vice Chair Asia, Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, United Nations. He is the recipient of Indian Science Congress Award conferred on him by the Prime Minister of India and the Haryana Vigyan Ratna. Very warm welcome, Mr. Bansal.
Thank you.
So, I would, or before actually I start with my questions, I would like to tell the audience that in the end, we will have Q&A, and they can type their questions in the chat box and we can pick questions and, pose those questions to our panelists. So my first question is to Dr. Bansal. Dr. Bansal, why is GM so controversial? And how do we tackle this issue politically? Because there are many voices, and most often we hear the loudest voice, and those loudest voices are against GM.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel discussion, which is very important, and I'm happy that Center for Civil Society is taking all those initiatives which are really important, in this 21st century, particularly when we talk of, our progress in the country based on science and technologies. And coming to the, the subject on GM crops, GM crops are not controversial. GM crops topic has been made controversial. And the perception of anybody, for that matter, for any technology which is entirely based on science, should be perceived by the scientific facts and scientific evidences. And as far as scientific evidences go, globally, and when I talk about globally means where talking of at least about 70 countries wherein GM crops at the moment is prevalent in terms of either production or, through export or import processes. And, there's no issue with regard to biosafety of any such edible GM crop. And there are about a dozen of such crops which are grown globally, I mentioned, in about 70 countries. And as a scientist, what I would very clearly mention time and again, that there's no controversy with regard to whether you talk of biosafety to human beings, biosafety to the animals, or biosafety to the environment. Instead, it gives you an edge over the conventionally bred food crops with regard to the benefit to the farmers, to the smallholder farmers, and of course, with regard to the environment as well, because it's reducing the quantity of pesticide to be utilized for controlling the pest damage, which is occurring in most of the crops, whether you talk of cotton, you talk of field crops, particularly vegetables, including brinjal, which is so very important. So I would just like to sum up as an introductory remark. The GM crops are in vogue, are in being cultivated for the last about 25 years. And more than 29 countries are producing and growing it, over and about 190 million hectares. And there are about 70 countries who are not themselves able to grow, do import it for their own utilization for the masses. So there are about total 20 such countries who are eating day in, day out GM food crops, and farmers, those countries, including some of the developing countries like Argentina, Brazil, China for that matter, Philippines, Bangladesh, they are very, very well benefited, including India with BT cotton, where about 95% of adoption is there by the farmers. And also quickly, I may like to add here, that these BT cotton is not edible crop as such, but we know the cotton seed oil is edible and is a part of vegetable ghee. And for the last 20 years, in one form or the other, it's been consumed by the public at large in India as well. So this is my introductory remarks at the moment, please.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal. This was quite useful. Krish, I want to come to you now. I have come across people, in fact, some of my colleagues also had concerns about GM crops in terms of its taste, in terms of health concerns. And Dr. Bansal mentioned, I wanted to ask you if we are already consuming any GM, and he confirms cottonseed oil, which is consumed, is actually, most likely a GM. And so tell us, if there are, in terms of taste, in terms of health issues, if there are any such, and plus, how do we tell others that it's okay to cook with GM food ingredients, and in terms of taste as well as health, there is nothing problematic.
So let me actually make it sort of interesting. I think, Professor Bansal hit the nail on the head when he spoke about the fact that there are no problems, with this. We're already consuming and so on. In fact, let me sort of spread the canvas wider and say, we've been eating genetically modified organisms since the dawn of agriculture. Okay. So, I think sometimes, let me therefore step back from that provocative statement and say, when I'm essentially saying that literally everything you're eating right now is genetically modified. Okay. And to qualify that, let me first explain that there are terms that we use in a scientific capacity, and there are terms that we use in a political or ideological capacity, right? And often the average public does not seem to be able to distinguish between the both, depending on who's louder, right? If the political and the ideological definition of the term is louder, it drowns out the scientific definition. I'll give one example and then come to GMO, right? The word natural, for example, you see it on every product. They'll say, this is natural, that is natural. It has no basis in science. The word natural is a class distinction, right? It is a political term. It is a term of exclusion. It is to say, oh, something is natural versus something is not natural is a meaningless term in science in that sense, right? Likewise, genetic modification is both a piece of technology that is as far old as the invention of agriculture, And it is also a modern day political term with its own hidden implications in terms of what it means, right? Now, it is also a term of economics. It is also a term of activism. And often the science and that are completely separated, right? The reason I say this is that when mankind domesticated grasses in the Middle East to make wheat and later in India and China rice and so on, when you think about what human beings selected for, they selected for traits in those plants that plants would have never survived in the wild, right? So for normally the grasses actually explode and the grains actually sort of they fly out so that it pollinates, etc. That's not suitable for cultivation. So we had to sort of pick the varieties of plants that were somehow broken in a way that they put all of their seeds in a single stalk, and it was easy for us to harvest by itself. If humans had not spotted these plants and said, you know what, I'm going to artificially select for this trait and ensure the survival of this over the next thousands of years, so that today we eat rice, wheat, barley, millets, what have you, right? You think about every plant. The modern day cauliflower or cabbage does not resemble the original mustard plant from which every single one of these things originated. So, and again, let's forget all far back, right? 20th century, we were irradiating seeds in the hope that some of them would go through these, some sort of, mutation, and then one of those would have good properties, and we would produce these things. Where do you think all the amazing breeds of seeds that powered India's green revolution came from? IR8, the variety of rice that is said to have saved millions and millions of lives, was also in that sense genetically modified. Of course, activists and people will tell you that it is no, it is about transgenic use of, the idea is you're taking DNA from one organism and putting it into another, like what happens with, say, a BT or any of these other situations, is where the problem lies, and we don't know what we don't know. Let's be fair, okay? Let's address concerns. At the end of the day, people tend to be passionate and personal about what they eat, right? They want to know, it has to be explained to them. So in my opinion, this is more to do with poor communication rather than anything else, right? We are eating genetically modified organisms, whether they are artificially selected in a very over 100-year period or irradiated to produce, seeds that have good properties, versus precise edited in a laboratory to produce the effects that you want, right? And part of the problem is that we are actually criticizing the business model, but in that process criticizing the science. You can validly criticize the business model of large companies making a monopoly, creating, for example, the whole idea of seeds that produce their own pesticides, or allowing you to dump tons of pesticides to kill weeds while the plant survives, which therefore has all these other side effects. So there, the problem is a criticism of regulation, a criticism of the monopolistic practices of certain companies, and control of, all of these things in a few hands as opposed to farmers. And the whole thing forgets the fact that we are in the middle of a world of climate change, where we will not be able to produce the kind of food we need to unless we use genetically modified crops that can grow anywhere, in urban environments, in drought resistant places, in flooded places. There is just simply no other option. And I hope we embrace these and see the distinction between what are genuine concerns about business models and economics and policy versus the actual science itself, which is just spectacular.
Thank you. This was quite interesting. So economics and science are two different things. And so that takes me to Anil ji. Anil ji, Krish का ये कहना है कि एक तरफ तो साइंस की बात है और साइंटिफिकली देखा जाए तो जीएम में कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, हेल्थ वाइज, टेस्ट वाइज ये बिल्कुल वैसा ही है। और जो नेचुरल शब्द है, यानी कि जिसको हम बोलते हैं कि कुदरती है, वो एक सिर्फ एक हमारा वहम है, क्योंकि सब कुछ कुदरती ही है। और अगर एक तरफ देखें तो कुछ भी कुदरती नहीं है, इसलिए कुदरती कहना अपने आप में कोई मायना नहीं रखता। तो लेकिन जो इन्होंने इकोनॉमिक्स की बात करी और इन्होंने कहा कि इकोनॉमिक्स को हमें एक तरफ करके देखना चाहिए। अब इकोनॉमिक्स की जब बात आती है, जब हम हिसाब किताब की या कॉस्ट बेनिफिट की बात करते हैं, तो फार्मर से अच्छा कोई पर्सपेक्टिव नहीं हो सकता, क्योंकि फार्मर है जो उस बीज को बोता है, उस बीज पर खर्चा करता है, उसके बाद जो उस पर लागत आती है, चाहे वो पानी की हो, पेस्टिसाइड की हो, इंसेक्टिसाइड की हो, वो सारा खर्चा करना फार्मर के कंधे पर है। तो एज अ फार्मर रिप्रेजेंटेटिव आप थोड़ा सा बताइए कि एक कन्वेंशनल बीज जो परंपरागत बीज है और दूसरा जो जीएम बीज है, इसके बीच में आपका लागत और दूसरा आपको मुनाफा, इन दोनों में, दोनों तरह के बीजों में क्या फर्क होता है?
Thanks for inviting me, first of all. And I agree with Mr. Ashok. He says that the problem is political. The conception, the view that seeing towards GM crops is not because there is just genes transfer. What we do in hybridization, we transfer genes. This has been going on since millions of years. So yeah, there's nothing new in GM, but these large companies may create a monopoly. That's the problem. Importing genes from other organisms, that is causing a problem. Even if we import a gene from other organism, it produces a protein which can be digested, which affects only a certain species. It's not harmful to human beings. Then why there should be such type of row against this science, this technology? This technology should not be opposed. That's what we think. There is no other alternative to feed the world if we don't accept this. So those people who are opposing it, they should revisit their view. They should think over it again, and with a frank mind, they should come in, or they should give some examples. They should give some proof, scientific proofs that this technology has caused this harm, this health issues have arisen. Nothing of that sort is happening. They don't give anything. They know how to make their voice loud. They know where to speak that the sound will be heard. But the people who are supporting are not doing that thing much. Even we are in support, but we don't know where to go and shout that our voice will be heard, our voice will be loud, and it will be heard by large masses. So it's not the problem of the technology, it's the problem of the misperception these people are having. They have to change it if we don't accept this. Now, Dr. Bansal had said that 70 countries are already consuming GM. Nothing has happened. We are importing genetically modified soybean oil. We are eating it for decades. And nothing has been spoiled, no harm out of it. Then why should we oppose this? So if we continue this type of argument and keep opposing this technology, one day our country is going to starve. Even smaller countries, the African countries and countries like Bangladesh, they are accepting this technology and they are encouraging their farmers to use it. The farmers are making money. The country is happy. The farmers are happy. Then why should we oppose it? That's the problem. We are going to support it at whatever level we can. And all those students, you said that what the students should think about it. Actually, this technology can create a lot of employment. Today, all those microbiology colleges students who are passing out of this college, what future do they have? No future. The companies which were involved in this type of activities, they have stopped their researches. They are not investing any money in this type of activities now. So these students who are graduating, who are passing out of the university, having degrees in their hand, they have no future at all because companies don't have any labs which are working in this direction. So we have to think it over again, and we should, with an open heart, accept this technology. If there are any flaws, they can be created. One good thing that has happened is that now our country has allowed SDN1 and SDN2 in our country. This is because they say that there's no gene imported from any other species or any other plant. It's just the genetic engineering in the same plant species. So it's not harmful. It may not be harmful. Okay, that's at least they have taken one step ahead. But the same thing is happening in case of BT and other genes which has been imported from other organisms, they are not harmful at all. And if they are they are profitable to the farmers. Estimated cotton. Even now, more than 60% of the cotton farmers have accepted this for a technology without any extension work. The government is spending so much on other extension works for making other varieties popular, but the farmers not accepting it. Even in spite of the ban on these varieties, the farmers are accepting it because they know there's profit in it. There is labor shortage. There is an acute labor shortage all over the country, and there is no other way to do this intercropping without STBT. You won't get labor in time for the weeding work. So we have to accept this. The farmers have accepted it. The people who are opposing this technology should study it. And if there is no harm, we should all come together and accept it. That's what I would like to say regarding this.
Anil ji, so Krish had raised a point about he had distinguished between the science and the economics of GM. So my question to you more was about the economics perspective, in the sense that some people allege that farmers have to buy seeds year after year. But in case of conventional seeds, they can save some seeds from the current produce for next year. And so they have to spend more money on procuring seeds year after year. This is one allegation. Second is they may say that in case of GM crops, the cost is actually more in terms of, let's say, pesticide, insecticide, or in terms of water usage, because first year, the yield may be good, but year after year, the yield decreases, and also the GM crops resistance to pests and insects also goes down. So are these allegations correct? What is your say from a farmer's perspective? Do you agree with it or not?
No, I don't agree with it because the investment for seeds is very little compared to the cost of production of the overall crop. And farmer knows that if he gets good seed, he will get good yield. Why he is spending it? Even if there is a ban, and the normal variety which is available in the market cost 700 rupees, and he is paying 850 rupees or even 1200 rupees for this variety, because he knows that the cost of production will be reduced by at least 4 to 5,000 rupees, and the yield will be increased by 5 to 7,000 rupees. So spending a couple of hundred rupees more is not an issue for a farmer. Farmer can travel thousands of kilometers for getting good seeds. I've seen many farmers. If there is an news in some paper that such and such farmer has produced so much of quantity in 1 acre, the farmers all over the surrounding area go to his farm, visit it, and try to get seeds, whatever it may cost. So cost of seed is not an issue, and we have to buy it every year. This is not in case of only BT. This is since Green Revolution, hybrid seeds have to be brought every year, every time. So farmer has accepted this, and if he's getting better yield, better money, why shouldn't he accept this? So this is not an issue. Only some people think that these companies are making lot of money and they are exploiting the farmers. But this is not exploitation. This is what farmers have chosen from their will. They can save their seeds of those indigenous varieties every year and so, but they are not getting yield. 70% of their crop is damaged due to the pest. And why they will use it? They are not getting proper yield. They have to spend more for pesticides. They have to spend more for weeding. Then why they will go for these seeds? The farmers themselves have turned away from these indigenous seeds because they are not profitable to the farmers. They are accepting these new seeds, this new technology, because they know they are going to make money. They know that their cost of cultivation is going to be reduced. They know that their quality of their produce will be better. So the farmers are accepting. So I don't agree with all these allegations these people are making.
Thank you, Anilji. Dr. Bansal, Anilji briefly talked about genome editing, that government recently allowed genome editing in India. So how is that different from genetic modification and plant breeding?
See, this is something wonderful that the government has done, in times with regard to any science-based technology. And I'm very happy, personally excited to hear this good news. The government of India has allowed, as Mr. Anil just mentioned, two different categories of genome-edited plants, SDN1 and SDN2. And in fact, all researchers, students, and and farmers, when the products will roll out onto their farms, they will be all very excited and will take the benefit of this technology. The difference, as you asked, rightly so, must be very clear, between the GM crops and genome editing. GM crops, first of all, I would like to tell you, it is not that the scientists would like to follow blindly to develop, GM of any particular crop. They will like to do it only when they are not successful through the conventional plant breeding method. I give an example of BT cotton we have talked about in our own country, taking a lot of benefit out of it, simply because it was not possible, through conventional plant breeding. They thought it will be the best route to improve the insect pest resistance in a variety like, or crop like cotton would be the GM route. And therefore they've taken a gene from a bacteria, and which is a transgene, there's no doubt about it, and inserted it into the genome of the cotton plant itself. And then the product is a BT cotton. Now, whether BT cotton is a variety or a BT cotton as a hybrid. If it is a hybrid, of course, whether it is from public sector or from a private sector, have to be bought every year by farmers year after year. If it is a hybrid from a public sector or from a private sector, or from a developed through a conventional breeding tool or developed through a GM route. That's one. If it is a variety, whether again through public system or a private system, variety need not be bought every year. But the point to be understood very well, again, I will come to the difference a little bit later in a minute, but the point which need to be understood very well, as so nicely and so simply Mr. Anil Ghanwat has explained, that the farmers are not worried about few hundred rupees extra per kg of seed. They want quality seed to have a quality produce, because they can get a better market price for it. They can save their own resources, whether you talk of pesticides, or even now we're talking, of course, we have not developed those varieties or hybrids which would be able to even save fertilizers, would be able to save, water, will be able to save many other resources for that matter, and labor intensive crop agriculture has to be taken, forward, to development of the GM crops, because labor is not going to be available, as we have seen in the COVID situation. And why do we want that, keep that labor always as labor? Let's try to uplift that labor as well. I mean, he should also, in fact, own some land and, become farmer himself when he would see that the technology is coming his way, very, very easily. So the difference, actually, I was trying to explain the example of BT cotton, in case of GM crop, that we have taken a gene from bacteria, it has been inserted into a plant, which would not have happened through conventional plant breeding tools, and we have got a GM crop. Now, in case of, genome editing, what we are doing, as Mr. Anil Ghanwat also, simply put it very nicely, that we can manipulate or alter the genes within the same crop genes, actually. We don't have to have any transgene bringing either from bacteria source or from another source and put it into that particular crop for improving its property, whether it is drought tolerance or flood tolerance or resistance to insect pests, etc. So there is a technology. In fact, we are precisely editing few bases of the DNA, within a gene, so which is also happening, in fact, naturally, and also is available naturally with that kind of a change which we are trying to mimic in an elite variety which is popular with the farmers. That kind of a variation will be existing in nature somewhere. I'm talking about natural genetic variation which is there. The other day I explained that in case of rice, we've got 100,000, 1 lakh kind of different genetic variability we have in different lines. So if it is there in one, but that's not high yielding, can we bring it to the one which is high yielding? And that is possible through genome editing, and so that it remains high yielding, and we can add a new trait altogether into it, which could be any trait, for example, resistance to insect pests or tolerance to drought, to salinity, or even quality for that matter. So here, and it takes much lesser time, and fortunately, thanks to Government of India, that they have kept it out of regulation. They've exempted from the biosafety assessment under Rule 20. of the rules 1989 of the Environmental Protection Act 1986. So that is something, a very forward-looking step, taken by Government of India. But what we are also expecting from Government of India at the same time is that let's not please forget about the good properties, good traits already incorporated through the GM route into many of our crop plants. Be it cotton, be it brinjal, be it mustard, or rice or wheat or groundnut or chickpea or pigeon pea. They're all there, developed by various public, funded institutions, really speaking. So those should also see light of the day. Those should also reach to the farmers' field so that they take the benefit. Ultimately, as Mr. Krish also mentioned, we are talking about right from 20th century or even before genetic modification, actually. So there's nothing which is not genetically modified. Only the difference is that in some cases for genetic modification, you use a conventional route. Then we moved on to mutation breeding. Then we moved on to mutation through radiation or chemicals. Then we moved on to this artificial selection. For example, we're talking of green revolution. Then we moved on to GM route. Because everything was not feasible or possible to have that given trait into a crop, through conventional breeding. So we have to bring genes from other sources which are occurring in those organisms. Now we have come down to the genome editing route. So what we're trying to say is that we are advancing with science and we are making this process more predictable, more accurate, more precise, and will save more of resources. At the same time, will make life finally better of the farmers, which I think we're all responsible for it. He's looking for these kind of technologies, irrespective of what cost, who provides it, public or private. He needs that kind of helping hand from all of us. It is our responsibility, whether I'm a scientist or not a scientist. I think it's important because they are the ones who are producing food for us. And as you said very rightly, if it is 9.3 billion, even globally when we talk about it, by 2050, where that extra food is going to come from these technologies, by even saving land. And please remember, we have to have the minimal environmental footprint. We have to bring all that increased production in a sustainable manner. We are a party to sustainable development goals to be met by 2030 of the United Nations. So therefore, there's every reason to believe that the science-based technologies are wonderful, and we must try to make use of them, not only for the farmers themselves, even for the consumers, and not only again for India, globally, India should take a leadership role in agriculture by embracing some of these technologies we just mentioned.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal. Krish, I have a question for you. So, your comment was quite interesting, what you said about natural. Now I want to ask you about the word organic. But organic, as we understand it, is also means that something which doesn't have insecticide and pesticide. So in that sense, can GM be organic and can it fill that gap? Currently, organic food is somewhat 3 times more expensive than normal food. I mean, we all want to buy food free of pesticide and insecticide. And while I know, one of my
even fertilizers, even
fertilizers, yeah.
Sure. So a colleague actually shared with me that, he no longer eats brinjal because he realizes that how much pesticide and insecticide is sprayed on brinjal, not because it's wheaty brinjal, but because of insecticide and pesticides. And, we all have heard of cancer tree that runs from Punjab to Bikaner and so on and so forth. So what role do you see for GM in that context?
Actually, it's a very organic is another term again that again has a sort of a, let me just say, there's a commercial definition of organic, right? Because if I'm a business, if I'm a farmer, if I'm anyone who's wanting to sell and make money, right? I want to be able to use a term that allows me to charge a premium, right? And so therefore, in every country in the world, there is what you call a minimum viable definition of what is organic. Right? Even if you just step aside from plants for a moment and talk about cage-free hens, for example, right? Our chicken comes from cage-free hens, for example. Depending on which country you are, that either can mean that the chicken has to be roaming around freely and cannot be in any cage. 2, the cage has to be at least 18 inches large or something like that. So all I'm saying is that many of these things are essentially definitions that lawyers have to pay attention to so that they don't get sued, rather than any meaningful sort of sense. Right? So organic food per se, and I keep explaining to when I talk to school kids and everyone else that look, so the whole idea behind how plants give you flavor, right? So why is one tomato tastier than another tomato? Why is one spice more intense than another spice? Ultimately, plants produce biochemicals, chemicals to defend against bacteria, fungi, and insects, and a whole range of things, all of whom want to come and obviously eat the stuff that the plant is making, right? And plants can't move around, so they have to produce. They produce chemical warfare because they can't defend themselves physically, right? And essentially, the logic is quite simple. The more a plant has to defend itself, the more flavor it will create. And so that is why an organic tomato, if you will, because it's more likely to be attacked by pests, its yield will be low, but the tomato will be tastier, right? So, and again, let me make it very clear. Taste and nutrition, there may be some overlaps, but there is no clear correlation as well, right? Eating a regular tomato that is non-organic is somehow not unhealthy. There is no evidence that it is unhealthy. But surely maybe an organic tomato is tastier. So here's the interesting aspect, and I'll kind of come back to how genetically modified GM technology can truly actually make organic work in a meaningful way. And I want to say that before people think about the future of organic, just look at what happened to Sri Lanka. Okay, this is a economic disaster, right? Again, a poor understanding of science, and therefore a poor understanding of economic policies, all in the name of saying, oh, we will save the planet by only growing organic. It should be a lesson to everyone in thinking about how there is a space for organic food, because there is a space for people who are willing to pay the premium for the extra flavor and for all of the other kinds of stuff, and for that smaller yield, exclusivity, and so on, right? But again, if you have 7 billion people on the planet, you just simply cannot feed all of them with the modern definition of what organic food really is. And given the fact that microbes and pests, remember, they have a huge genetic advantage. They are constantly mutating, they're constantly changing and figuring out ways in which they can wipe out your crop, right? We're going to see that with the Cavendish banana. It happened to the Gros Michel banana in the 1930s, which is now completely wiped out. And now there is another Panama, whatever, that disease, that's the fungal disease that's going to happen to the Cavendish banana as well, right? And then we'll have to figure out another variety of banana that we can all eat. So what I'm trying to say is that, look, we spoke about, I think, Professor Bansal also spoke about the whole transgenic, and Anil also spoke about the whole transgenic issue, about how we're still sort of trying to compromise and say, no, let us allow us to at least edit a single organism's genes and not allow introduction of genes from other organisms. I would say I don't think that's necessary too, right? India has the largest number of diabetes patients in the world, okay, right? And it's only growing up. Where do you think that insulin is coming from? Right? When insulin was produced, that insulin used to be taken, you had to kill a cow to take its pancreas and then synthesize that insulin. That was the only way you could do that. Now, what do? We essentially introduced human DNA into yeast and bacteria, transgenics, to get that yeast and bacteria to synthesize insulin, synthetic insulin, which is how we're able to have affordable insulin, right? I don't see anyone protesting against the use of transgenic technology when it comes to insulin. But somebody has a problem with BT cotton or BT brinjal and so on, right? I think again, trust the science, right? At the end of the day, living things, again, genes are units of, essentially a gene encodes the ability to produce a protein, right? The arbitrary distinction that somehow this is one organism, that's another organism, is very arbitrary. Right? We share genes with the bacterial ancestors, eukaryotic ancestors. We all evolved from, right? And so, which is not to say that there are no dangers. I'm just saying that scientists can figure out what those dangers are. And as Professor Bansal said, scientists don't do this recklessly. There is peer review. They use conventional breeding as much as possible and use genetic modification only when there is absolutely no way that conventional breeding has a solution, right? And let's also remember that doing this work is really hard and expensive, right? And having scientific misinformation drive the politics, and that drives the funding in turn, essentially means that today we are unfortunately restricted to using genetic modification technology only for pest resistance, Think about, I mean, we could be creating vegetables that have more flavor, more antioxidants, more vitamins, climate change resistance, flood resistance, right? And in fact, even we could be genetically modifying and creating trees that could fix more carbon and do nitrogen capture and then avoid, you having to put a ton of fertilizers, right? And which is where the whole organic things, you can actually use GM technology to genuinely create high yield organic, or if you say quote unquote organic vegetables and organic crops that do not require a ton of pesticides. But today we don't do that, because I think the entire discourse has been sort of become toxic, right? And again, on a lighter note, I just say that part of the problem is that we live in a world of the internet where the advantage is that everyone knows everything, and the disadvantage is everyone knows everything. Okay? And the problem here is that nobody knows. Nobody understands p-values, statistical, all these other things that scientists use. And so nobody's able to prioritize what is important, significant knowledge or a finding versus insignificant trivia. Right? And whoever has the loudest voice, whoever has the most amount of influence, is simply able to say, point to one study somewhere that found that a particular variety of rat was fed GM food for about 30 days, and it showed a higher rate of cancer. A study that has been debunked so many times. It doesn't matter. But what do people know? They only know that study. They don't bother the fact that it has been debunked because it was a poor sample and the rat was already susceptible to cancer. And so the problem is that I think ultimately this is an issue where, first and foremost, I think people need to be educated about what this is, and people need to distinguish between policy, ideology, political decision making, as well as and the science behind it, right? And I hope we do that. And in a sense, I really think there's an opportunity for us to potentially eat really tasty organic produce, but that is also high yield, provided we are able to genetically modify.
This is very interesting. Dr. Bansal, you want to add anything here?
No, I just want to only add, see, and as a scientist, I have gone through the science of it very well. And our clients are farmers. And as Mr. Anil Ghanwat mentioned, we should give a choice to the farmers. The availability of these, whether conventionally bred crops or genetically modified crops. Tomorrow we will have genome edited crops, and not that we will not have, GMO crops. They will be there. Not that we will not have non-edited crops of the same variety I'm talking about it. They will also be there. So I think we should to the farmers as well that here is a choice available before him, as long as we are able to protect the quality of, which is very important. So I think farmers should have their own decision-making capacity, which they have better than us, actually speaking. So if by creating this kind of a canvas available, same crop, same trait, through different routes, I mean, if it's also possible, I think let him also, kind of give a viewpoint. And I think Mr. Anil Ghanwat, as you rightly mentioned before, is probably representing a large farmers' body. So I think what I would only say as a scientist, that these technologies are totally, excuse me, science-based, and they've been very well tested for all biosafety angles, biosafety to the environment, biosafety to human beings, biosafety to animals, or even to the soil microbes, and all have been tested. And I like one of the comments made by Mr. Krish, wonderfully well he made this comment, which I also advocate the same thing. That with the adoption of some of those GM crops, I'm not saying for every crop that is GM route, I mean, through the kind of, RDNA technology which we talk about it, these could even lead to a better way of natural farming. Nobody will go against natural farming. What's natural farming? You would like to have less pesticide, even less water, which we are talking so precious, commodity. So ultimately we are moving towards that kind of a goal, but then these seeds become a very integral component, seeds which have better quality, seeds which are better of these traits to utilize the national resources more efficiently. And ultimately, I think in a country like India, where we have many voices, scientists or not only few panelists, and we should try to, discuss with everyone around, if I may say, even as a citizen of this country, and should actually speaking take a concerted kind of a decision, for our country to progress further, life of farmers, better quality produce for the, for the consumers, like antioxidants, as Mr. Krish mentioned, is so very important for increasing immunity and every good health. We should together actually within our own country take a decision, involving all kinds of people who are, really, will be part of it, and take a decision where we want to move towards, and try to take government with us. Government is, of course, again, for the people, by the people, of the people, actually speaking. So I think we should all help the government to take decision in a very cohesive manner. Not that I say something only should be accepted, or what Mr. Krish or Mr. Anil. No, let's have every voice. Ultimately, our objective is what? Our objective is to make life not only of farmers, of the whole country, better, including consumers, through the use of technology. We are using technology in every walk of life, whether you talk of mode of transport, or you talk of our communication through telephone, or our using these computers. Every time there is a new computer and all. We are making a progress with regard to technology everywhere. So why not, in a positive fashion, actually speaking? If the technology is bad, and I must add a point here, which who raised, that the crops will become resistant to some of these, pesticide. Yes, this is a true fact. As a scientist, I know that the crops over the time period will become resistant to a particular insecticide or a pesticide. But then it happens only 10, 15, 20 years later. And which is the continuous battle, because the genomes of those pests also keep evolving. So this is a fight which is going on. Therefore, we have new emerging pests. But not that we can just sit idle. We have to move on, utilize our science-based technology further, and keep making our plants better fit, for the environment, climate change, and better quality, etc., etc. So I think together we should be concerned about it as country, 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, to take this agenda forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal. Anilji, I now want to ask you one thing about, what exactly went wrong in terms of the regulatory approvals. So from BT cotton, initially BT cotton was also not approved, but we know that there was a lot of pressure from farmers, and farmers, regardless of the approval, had started sowing BT cotton, and the approval came much later. And then we know the story of GM mustard, which was developed by the students and the faculty of Delhi University. It was successful, but still it was not given approval for commercial usage. And now BT Brinjal, we know the story of Jeevan Saini, the farmer based in Haryana, that how his crop was officially by the government, removed and burnt without any compensation given to him. So BT Brinjal is another story, while we know that Bangladesh BT Brinjal is being commonly used. So can you tell us what has gone wrong in the regulatory approval? And so genome editing is one thing, but I understand that it's probably just a step towards fixing things. So then what is the ideal regulatory scenario that you would advocate for?
Unfortunately, in our country, such type of decisions are not taken scientifically, they are taken politically. We have a committee which takes trials for years together, and then when they are satisfied that this is not harmful to the environment, to the human race, to the animals, nobody is harmed, and then they give an approval. And when this committee has approved a certain variety, who is a politician, who is the government, who is a minister to disapprove it? He shouldn't have the power actually. But this is politics. If they think that people are shouting against it, and if we approve it, we may lose our votes. Such types of decisions. So this is the main problem. Where science is concerned, the final authority should be the scientist, should be the committee, and they should take the final decisions, and the politicians should not be allowed to interfere in these things. In case of GM mustard, actually that genetic modification is only used for hybridization, better hybridization. The mustard is a self-pollinated crop, and if you have to pollinate it with a different variety, it's very difficult, it's very tedious. So this development has just make it easier for hybridization. It has nothing to do with the farmers. but still that has been opposed and that has been banned. In even BT Brinjal, it's a street variety. Now they keep opposing that multinational companies are exploiting our farmers. But this is developed in our country, our students, our indigenous company, and still is not approved. It is saving almost 50% of the damage caused by the fruit borer, by the shoot borer. And if we are saving 50%, means our yield is increasing by 50%. We are discussing this issue today because we are worried about how we are going to feed the world in 2050. If this type of technology is accepted, in Brinjal, we are just increasing the yield by 50%. And if the plantation increases by 100%, we are having lot of food to eat. This won't be a problem. So in any case, we want nutrition. We have golden rice, which gives a nutritious rice to the. We have malnutrition pockets in our hilly areas. Just produce that wheat and give it to those people there. We can get rid of this malnutrition problem. We have saline soils all over India, all the river banks, which is very alluvial soil, but they are saline, so nothing can be produced in this. If we introduce varieties which are salinity resistant, all that land will be productive. We'll have lot of food. Actually, we will be surplus in 2050. It's not a problem. There are calculations showing that we will be out of land. We won't have so much of land to produce food. There is not much deal of now. Now the technology has advanced. Now there are towers. There's vertical farming. There's aeroponics. There's hydroponics. There's no need of land. Now these people, I'm seeing this some FEA activities bombarding his comments on the screen and opposing GM. But these people have to study actually what the harm is there in this. Just because he is saying that we should go to the village and we should have desi cows, whether this country will starve if you are going to go back towards nature. What we think is what Ashok ji has said, that go ahead towards nature. You want good taste tomatoes, you can have just modify that gene and put it into that variety. You will have whatever the taste you want, whatever the color you want, whatever the size you want. Don't use fertilizers. Have something else. But this genetically modified genetic engineering technology will give you whatever type of crop you want, whatever type of fruit you want, whatever taste, whatever size, everything can be possible. But if you keep opposing it and just going back towards nature won't help, it will starve the country. That's what I think.
Thank you, Anil. Okay, so now is the time for questions. So any questions from audience? Please post your questions in the chat box.
I think it was just one particular comment. I think I was just looking through the comments, and again, to be respectful to people, it is understandable that people have strong opinions on these issues, right? At the end of the day, what people see around the world as ordinary people is that they see farmers suffering. They see agriculture becoming more and more difficult. They do see a few companies kind of dominating and monopolizing essentially the supply of food. And in that sense, I think all of this obviously is going to affect the way people see it. But how they diagnose the problem is often, GM is to blame, that is to blame, this is to blame, and so on. And I think sometimes the correlation and how you sort of figure out the causal analysis is often what is often broken, because you don't quite understand it at the level of depth, right? And just to give you an example, I think one of the comments that basically said that rural areas, if they all did the agriculture that we did, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, apparently, is very sustainable, completely, etc. Absolutely agree, right? But then we don't live in villages, do we not? Half of the world's population is urban. And cities are where civilization grows. Everybody living in a village wants to send their kids to the city. You may not like cities, but cities are where things happen. That's where mankind moves ahead. For the last 5,000 years, it's cities where the the economic wealth, the industrial wealth, the intellectual wealth, all of that sort of stuff got created in cities. Villages are important because villages are the places where that produce your food, that produce the things that you need. But they form a critical element in how you supply a city. A city cannot grow its own food, right? And we exploded in population because we were able to essentially address the problem of yield. India would have, I mean, I think most people who are kind of, on this anti-GM route, I think have just forgotten what the Green Revolution was about. It was the difference between starving to death and an India with maybe a 200 or 300 million population today, and none of the demographic dividend that made us the economic superpower since the 1990s once we liberalized, versus a country that have been like a sub-Saharan part of Africa. Right, that is the difference. I think people sometimes forget that. I think maybe it's not taught well enough in school. Maybe it has to be taught emotionally. Boss, this is literally increasing your yield and fighting against nature. And remember, and I think people, again, I said people have this sentimental notion of nature, right? Life, the definition of life is one form of life eating another form of life, be it a plant, be it an animal, and it is a perennial battle. That is the very definition of life. You have to, as Professor Bansal put it right, this is a fight. You have to fight with every tool you have to prevent yourself from starving, right? And we know that every one of those arguments about too much population, all of that is bunkum, right? More population is an asset. And if you have a larger population, you have to feed them. And if you have to feed them, you have to fight pests. And you have to fight pests, you have to use every tool at your disposal, right? Instead of saying something like, oh, I will go back to how villages produce food 300 years ago. Boss, that village would have produced enough food to feed the village. That's it. I mean, how are you going to become a modern industrial society unless you use the tools of science? And yes, and I absolutely empathize. While you do that, the questions that have to be told, the questions that have to be heard, right, at the right forum, right, for the people who make policy decisions, the people who make these decisions, are about what are the impacts? Are we creating monopolies? Are we adversely affecting the finances of the average farmer? Are we putting them into debt traps? And there are enough data points. We've seen this happen with American agriculture. We've seen, yes, but we only specifically see that one point while forgetting the fact that we are now producing 10x, 20x the food that we were able to produce 100 years ago. And we need to produce 70% more by 2050, right? And we simply cannot say no to this. So all I urge activists and others to do is to, as much as you say that, you're not being represented, boss, you are the loudest voice here. Okay? I mean, we are backward in the sense of adoption of genetic modified technologies because the activists have clearly done a fantastic job of communicating how bad they are. Okay. And so I would urge you to perhaps read the science and understand a little bit of that history, that we are now a population of 7 billion people. And unless we use every element of science and every tool to fight against nature, if we have to feed people, right? There's nothing moral about creating a perfect, organic, sustainable village that feeds no one except itself. There is nothing moral about that. I think it's immoral. So, I just want to sort of address that one particular question. I don't understand if, I don't know if there are any other questions that you guys saw that I think maybe the others want to address, but I just thought I'll, point this out.
There are, Dr. Bansal and Anilji, if there are any comments you have.
No, I would only say that, as Mr. Krish started with, kind of agriculture where we had no chemicals, for example, being sprayed, or any fertilizers, kind of synthetic fertilizers which we're using today were not utilized at all. But yeah, that was no doubt, one of the ways to produce what little you could. But then that was not enough for us to actually move on, because we could not ever control our population, and if we have to feed the growing population, naturally you have to find ways, to increase per unit land area, the production. Otherwise, you will end up, deforestation and cutting a forest to produce more because you like to, extend the large area under cultivation, which is not at all advisable. So the best thing would be, therefore, that can we try to still come back to that kind of a scenario, because we have come a long way, from, let's say, for example, if we say 10,000 years ago, agriculture started, we've come a long way. We can go back because the population in the way has gone up. So, but can we still try to use any kind of available technology to produce our crops in a very sustainable manner, still, with less fertilizers, less pesticides, I said before. And I think that's the best bet today to meet appears. Whether you do it through conventional breeding, yes, welcome. Whether we do it through any other technology, which is well tested over time, for example, GM crop well tested over time. Even, for example, public sector in USA, if you talk of GM papaya, this is all public sector, or you talk of, Brinjal, the example was given where we have got even public sector labs, involved in it, so I think whatever technology today, genome editing is trying to actually doing the same, mimic what is occurring in those, lines which I said before, but they're not high yielding. So the conventional brand breeding, if you do it, it will take 20 to 30 years to develop that variety. Here it gives you a possibility of developing the same, which is again, which we have kind of lost, from the farmers' field because they're not high yielding, but they are conserved in the national gene banks. So if you can mimic that kind of variation through genome editing into our elite crops which are high yielding, I think we will save a lot of resources and a lot of energy and money. And of course, it will be good all for the farmers and consumers, I said. So I think we should try to be more, more sustainable in our production ways with less harm to the environment, to the soil, and to the, all other organisms, all insects. All insects are not deadly. There are friendly insects. We have to save them. For example, butterflies. So there are ways. Actually, we should therefore together, come out with a solution rather than, having only kind of a discussion of this kind, which is important. I understand from the awareness point of view, yes, to understand each other. But more would be to have a solution-based discussion. Not in a debate like this or discussion like this. Overall, whatever the way we can, wherever politicians, they should help us out, really speaking, because they are the leaders. They are chosen by the public at large. Persons like Mr. Anil, Ghanwat, they should be able to, find ways by dealing with, public discussions that, okay, we finally come to a conclusion, that this is what is important in this crop. We take this route. In this crop, we take this route, or whatever is feasible for the better growth of the country, better environment, better life, ultimately, of the consumers and everybody around us, including all organisms around us, actually. Somewhere that I said, this planet belongs not only to human beings, this planet belongs to all species with equal rights. Try to protect, so therefore we must try to find some nature-based solutions. I always talk about it, irrespective, well-tested technology utilized, whatever the way it should be. This is what my, conclusion would be.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal. As a lawyer, I just want to say here that there can be two ways of regulating something. One is that in presence of some data or some evidence, the regulator comes and puts some restrictions. And as per the Indian Constitution, those restrictions have to be reasonable restrictions, right? But how do we decide that some restriction is reasonable? In the light of course, some evidence or some data. The other way to think about it is, and a lot of people have advocated, and the current policy also seems to be based on the second system, is that we take an overcautious approach, and we say that this is potentially too dangerous, and therefore we ban it until we have an evidence that this is safe, right? So in the first system, there is presumption of liberty, that farmers are free to choose seeds that they like. And we will only ban something if we find evidence that something is dangerous. But in the second system, we start with a ban because we think that something is so potentially dangerous, or can be potentially dangerous. And until we find an evidence, or until we conclusively prove that it is not dangerous, we will continue to ban it, and we will not lift the ban. So in India, we are currently following the second approach. So Dr. Bansal and Ashok, I have this question, and this is also supported by Nassim Taleb. And so Taleb also has advocated for precautionary principle, at least in case of GM crops. How would you respond to that?
So I think it's nowadays very common for a lot of people to quote Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who otherwise, by the way, is a fierce, sort of very capitalistic. A lot of actors will not agree with him on almost everything else, but they agree with him on the precautionary principle when it comes to, look, I think as scientists, and I think Professor Bansal said this quite right. I think we ignore the fact that scientists and farmers, and this is important, both scientists and farmers, to say that they're not taking precautions. I mean, these are literally the people who make sure you get fed. Okay, is I think presumptuous. Okay, I truly believe. I think this is a fundamental. I think it was combine this with a question I think Sanskriti is asked about. How would you go about popularizing the concept? This should not be about popularizing the concept. No, this is a tool of science, right? First and foremost, I would happily get into a room with a policy advisor or somebody who's advising the government or somebody who is in government, and basically tell him, boss, you can't say some piece of technology is okay when it comes to making medicines. As genetic modification absolutely is. You wouldn't have half the medicines you have today if not for using genetic modification technology, but not okay for food. And that too, very specifically, in some situations, if it's only editing the same genome, or if you're irradiating crops, or you're using a variety of rice, which by the way, you're calling traditional now, which probably was synthesized about 40, 50 years back, which now are called traditional varieties of rice. So first and foremost, I think people making these decisions first need to understand that there is just so much noise that you have to cut through that and understand that this is a tool you have. Okay? That tool can be used to do bad things. You can have business models that can harm farmers. You can have business models that uproot communities. You can have business models, and you're a lawyer. You know the kinds of problems that happened with companies suing farmers over, where their seeds mixed with the GM seeds, and intellectual property, patents around genes and all of that. Those are problematic issues that have to be addressed separately, right? You have to look at the technology entirely separately from this, right? And I think that is, in a sense, the starting point. And once if everybody recognizes that, one, anything you're eating is genetically modified and has been, right? And two, understand that we have a moral responsibility to feed everyone. Okay. And I think that moral responsibility is more than the moral responsibility of anything else. I would argue, even saying, oh, save a forest, save all of that. Great. We need to do that. But if it comes at the cost of feeding someone, I'm sorry, your morals are broken. Okay. So I think we have to do that. And we have to recognize that it is possible to take precautions. It is possible. We now have 30 years. I mean, Professor Bansal said, we have 30 years of data that it is perfectly safe. We've been consuming it around the world, right? And I think it meets all the criteria for passing Nassim Nicholas Taleb's precautionary principle. That this is absolutely safe.
25 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, 25. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Krish. I think this session was critical in filling the pro-science gap in the discourse over transgenic technology in India. And, with this, we'll bring together voices that see value in innovation.
Yeah, just half a minute.
Sure.
I would like to say that if anybody wants to eat organic, he should produce his own food, organic food. Grow it wherever he wants. But you shouldn't compel the farmers to go organic. And you will compel the farmers to go organic and demand it in a cheap price. You are not ready to pay for it. Even in America, very, very wealthy people can afford organic. It's no way that Indian public is in a position to eat organic food. The cost is very high. So if you want to produce it on your terrace and eat it, don't compel the farmers. We should have the freedom of what type of technology we have to use in our farm, what type of seeds we have to use, where we have to sell. We should have that freedom. The Constitution has given us that freedom, and we should have it. Just because somebody wants to eat organic food, so we are compelled to eat organic food. And if someday, if there's a law that everyone will go organic, then be prepared to stand in the queues for kilometers long. You won't have any food. Just look at Sri Lanka and many other countries which are, even in Sikkim, that experiment has failed. Non-organic food is smuggled into Sikkim today. There are articles over it. So we have to be rational, think properly over this, and in no way the farmer should be compelled. We should have the freedom of technology, whatever technology we have to use, whatever the seeds that are available all over the world. we should be allowed, because we have to compete in the business. If we are not allowed to use the technology which is used by other farmers all over the world, how can we compete with them? They are producing 3 times more than what we are producing here in India today. So if we are provided those seeds, if we are allowed to get those seeds, we will compete with them, and we have shown it. We have done it in cotton. We were importing cotton in before 2000, and when this technology was allowed, we are exporting. We are one of the largest exporter of cotton today. So this is the miracle that has happened, and it can happen in all crops, and the world can be happy and well fed in 2052. That's what I would like to say.
I would like to thank all the panelists first, and then all the audience for coming and attending this panel discussion. Thank you so much for your valuable time. Thank you.